The Joe Rogan Experience.
Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Hey Joe, great to see you again, Bob.
Same here, long time.
Joe, you are still to this day the most watched ever podcast we have ever done. That's on YouTube.
That's just unreal. It's unreal.
It is unreal because it shows you how many people are just absolutely fascinated by the story. And what you guys have done in this new film is essentially recreate S4 and using AI, recreate you as a young man in these experiences that you had. And it was really excellent. Luigi, you're the one who put the film together. You figured it all out. And first of all, what was the technology that you guys used to recreate everything?
Yeah, I just want to say there's about 10% AI in the film, but there's 90% Blender, and that's actually handmade CGI. So everything you see is all handmade. And even the de-aging of Bob Lazar, we scanned Bob, we went over to his house, scanned his face, took a process of de-aging him through that, then creating a digital model of Bob in different ages, and then placing him in the environment. And then in some instances, at the very end, we perfected or kind of put a bow on it with a little touch of AI, but the whole thing is handmade. So the craft, the environment, the papoose slave, the facility, the equipment, and the people. So it's not, there's one of the guys that Barry in the film is a guy called Luis Martinez that's been working with me for the past 10 years, and he laughs at it because he goes, I can't believe I'm Barry, so.
Does he look anything like Barry?
Actually, he does. That's why we chose him. Yeah.
Where's Barry, the actual Barry now?
I don't know, I kind of thought at one point, after all this happened, we would at least hear from one of those guys. But I never heard from anybody after the initial release of all the information.
It seems like, well, I don't know, but if people are able to keep secrets for this long, it's got to be very difficult to just blurt it out. Like, if you're holding on to a secret for 20, 30, 40 years, it's like...
I guess these guys were lifers, though. Yeah. I mean, they spent most of their time there. They spent at least 2 weeks at a time and had 1 week off. So they stayed at the base. I mean, these guys were hardcore. I had just come in on the project, so I don't know. I don't know what happened to him. I'd love to know. I suspect that Dennis Mariani, my supervisor, died. People track him down, all the way to point to speaking to his family, and they said, yeah, he had some classified job out in the desert or something. They showed me his gravestone and stuff, so, at least they were able to track him down, but I've never heard of any leads on Barry or Renee or anything like that.
What is it like seeing the recreation of it in a film? Because, essentially it was your direction, better word, your description of it, you telling them exactly how everything was laid out, and then once they recreate it, feeling like when you watch it.
Well, the final product is absolutely mind-blowing because, as I've said to Luigi, it looks like you guys downloaded that out of my brain. I mean, you could describe something 100 times, and until you actually make a picture, it doesn't become clear. But, this took years. I think it was like 5.5 years from when I first
met Luigi, and he said, I can do this. And the quality kept improving to where he started showing me pictures, and I went, Jesus, that's really it. It's not really it. It's really it. And I mean, it blew me away. Later on, he showed me a 3D environment where I could put goggles on and move around inside. I mean, that made the hair stand up on my arms. It was unbelievable. So I don't know if I could really describe how that made me feel, but it felt like I was teleported back there. And that's when really I developed an admiration for Luigi's talent. I said, I'm behind this, and flew out to Canada a couple times. I didn't have much to do with the film other than, I guess, a couple times going out there and going, no, that's right, that's the wrong color, move this here, do that. And but those guys spent over 3 years working on it. And they never showed me anything. I speak to Luigi, a couple times a month, and he'd always say, oh my God, you won't believe this. I said, show me. No, it's not done yet. So I really didn't get it to see anything till close to the end. But when I did, really, without trying to sound dramatic, it really put tears in my eyes, going that you did it. Just stop. It's perfect.
Well, I had a movie with you and sit with you. There was a bunch of times, and you're like,
yeah.
You could tell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I swear I could feel that place. I could feel it watching that movie. And it really freaks me out because, as I said before, it's not like what I saw. It's exactly what I saw. It's perfect. It's just like Luigi was at S4 with a camera. So it worked.
It's a very unique documentary in that regard, and watching it with you, seeing you experience this thing, and then me trying to imagine what it's like for you. You're this young scientist who gets brought in on this thing without much explanation, and then all of a sudden you're confronted by this craft. And the way it's broken down in the film, you get to actually see you viewing this thing and being in the presence of this thing for the first time. It's just, I could just only imagine what that must have been like for you. And it's so weird to watch you watch it again and see your wheels spin.
Yeah.
What the fuck happened to my life, man?
Right.
What did they do to me? What did they make me experience? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, I really can't fill in the blanks there. It's I want to just say that there was a time when Bob got angry at me a lot because I wouldn't show him, and he was like, "Come on, show me." And I said, "It's not ready yet. I don't want to show you something." But at a certain point, we had to, and Bob started remembering more stuff. Yeah, that's true. It really made a big difference when he showed me some things, and walking down the corridor here, wait, there's another door there. I mean, it was like I was going back into the facility, and really brought, actually seeing it again, really brought some things back that I had forgotten about. So that.
But what's really fascinating is, for people that don't know your story, you came up with a story, you talked to George Knapp, and was it 89?
88, 89, somewhere in there.
So, late 80s, you've essentially told the exact same story all these years. And then, within the last, 9-10 years, we've started to get all these reports. There was the New York Times story, there was the Go Fast video and the Fleer video, and all these videos that show a craft that's moving the way you described this sport model moving.
Right.
Which kind of freaked a lot of people out with the way it rotated and turned.
Yeah, it does the belly roll, face towards where it's want to go, and then it takes off. And yeah,
it's exactly how you described all those years ago, which is really fucking crazy.
Well, that's the way it was.
But it's crazy because you had this story way back then, and everybody's like, this guy's just making things up. This is all cockamamie bullshit. And then you see those videos from these fighter jets, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. It's moving the exact same way he described. It's doing what he described in 1989.
Yeah.
Time to take a drink. Cheers.
Yeah.
It's so weird. I can't. I've had so many conversations with people, and one of the things that comes up is, do you think Bob Lazar's telling the truth? And I say, look, I don't know. There's no way I can know, but it doesn't seem like he's lying. I've been around a lot of liars.
Look, nobody can know unless you're there. I'm the biggest skeptic of all. Although if you look at Wikipedia, it says I'm a conspiracy theorist or something.
I think it says I'm a far-right podcaster.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's crazy. But that's my train of thought.
Well, basically, are you a conspiracy theorist? No, you don't even look at this stuff.
Well, if you have a lie, you have one lie. It's amazing because you've told the same one.
Well, it's a pretty detailed lie.
It's also not normal. Like, normally when people lie, they get bored with the same lie, and then they come up with another lie, and then there's some other story. You catch them. Eventually you catch them. There's some cockamamie new thing that they come up with, and it's the type of people that are that deceptive. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the standard model of someone.
Well, there are other people involved with it.
Yes. That's also part of the
This is for the first time Gene Huff finally is on film, because when I had the test flight information, he was he was the first person I told about that. And, we were all able to go out and see it. And so everybody knew that I wasn't crazy.
And then also all the confirmation that you were being fucked with. That, when you were in the gym, they would show up and open up your locked car doors and open your trunk and leave it there so you'd go out there and see it. They'd go to your house when you weren't there.
Yeah, they were even following George Knapp and all of us, anybody that had anything to do with it at that time. Yeah, they were keeping eyes on. It was
not just eyes, but a lot of intimidation tactics, just letting you know that they can touch you.
Yeah. So I've really worked for decades to push this out of my mind, so it's always tough to bring it back, instead of talk about it. And although it might be funny now, it wasn't funny then at all. It was a really stressful time, and still is a very stressful thing for me.
I know it's so many years ago, but do you remember the thought that came in your mind when you realized that it was yours?
Do I remember the thought?
I remember the experience.
Yeah, I remember the feeling.
Of recognize, because initially you saw the American flag.
Yeah, when I saw the American flag, when I first went in, the first time I went in through the hangar door instead of around the back, slid my hand across it, saw the American flag, and I thought, oh my God, this explains the UFO nuts. No,
it's ours.
Yeah, this is ours. This is a new top secret fighter. We came up with a new propulsion system, and it explains everything because I never believed in flying saucers. I thought people were nuts. But when they started reviewing everything with me, I was trying to replace somebody, or they were trying to use me to replace somebody as quick as possible. And they had two directives. Directive one was to duplicate the technology with available material at any cost, which is exact verbatim what it was. And directive two was to be able to disable this technology at a distance at any cost. And, once you start thinking about that, wait, don't you guys know how the thing you built worked? And it's kind of like they left that out. That, by the way, this isn't ours. And Barry is the guy that filled me in going, no. This is an alien craft. And we need to figure out how this works. Look at the technology here. This is decades, light years ahead of where we are. and it was a shock, really, to me. I remember going home that night and just laying in bed and reviewing everything that everybody said that day. And I really don't remember how I felt the following days, but it was just a different feeling.
The world just changed.
Yeah. It was, I don't know, I really can't put it into words.
Well, I couldn't imagine what that experience is like. And it's also very strange that they would bring you in and not specifically state to you that this is not ours. They just bring you in and just give you a directive. This is what you were trying to accomplish.
Well, they gave me a bunch of briefings. Everything was moving at a very fast. I don't know why. I think I mentioned in the movie, right prior to I got there were Russians involved. And, from what I can ascertain, there was an exchange of information. And then we discovered something of great importance. And, of course, kicked the Russians out and just held on to that information ourselves. And there was kind of a knowledge vacuum there. There was also an accident, and I was told I was replacing someone that was injured. I believe he actually died.
There's no record of who this person was, or has anybody ever tried to figure it out?
I don't know. I don't have any names. I just know that Barry told me, I'm replacing somebody that he used to work with. And he was without a lab partner for a while. So when I came in there,
How long was a while?
I don't know. But I mean, that brings up a good point. First of all, we're dealing with alien or another civilization technology, whether it was from another dimension, another time, another planet. I mean, who really knows? So I'll eventually get to answer the question here, but wouldn't you think this place would be more like the lunar receiving lab, where everything is white? So you can see a speck of dust. Everything is sterile. People are being extremely careful with what they're doing, but you're not seeing that. This is in now something akin to an aircraft hangar in the middle of the desert. There's dust on everything. People are taking everything nonchalantly. There's a friggin' poster about the thing. They're here, poster there.
Thank you, Luigi, for getting me. We got to figure out a place for that. Put it in here.
It's awesome. But I mean, they went to the trouble of making a poster. They actually
I think right here.
That's a good place.
Right there.
But they actually cut one of the amplifiers out of the crap. So my point is, my point is, it's so nonchalant at this point. When they first had it had to be at that level, and they became so used to it, so familiar with it, that to them it just became like another fighter aircraft or something from another country. So it's it must have been there a long time, is what my point is. Because look, as soon as you have something that unique, you don't let it just sit there in a hangar and be exposed to the environment and have security people walking by and people touching it. I mean, it's in an isolated, sealed, secure environment, and they were past that. So I think it had been there for a decade or decades, a long time. And these guys were intimately familiar with it, not afraid of it, and knew what.
They essentially had gotten just completely acclimated to the fact that this craft exists, that it was there, and there had been relatively little progress as far as figuring it out and figuring out what it does and how to recreate it. So it just kind of sat there. And so
I think they were making very little progress. And I think they kept going over the same road again and again. And they probably had other experts there and just didn't. And I think the reason I got hired is because I was a guy out in left field that didn't necessarily follow what was going on. I mean, the biggest distractors in to me anyway, in the story, are other scientists, other physicists, well, they would have hired me because I'm the top guy in the field. Yeah, you probably are. But I think they hired plenty of you guys, and you just kept going down the same road and didn't do anything. I think they were looking for somebody that just would have some radical idea and just to push the project forward, because everything had stalled when I got there. And I think they were just in a desperate move to make some progress.
One of the things you talked about in the first podcast that I think is really important is that the only way for science to really progress is that these various have to be able to communicate, and you have to be able to share ideas, and you have to be able to collaborate. But that's not how this was run, because it was so top secret. Everything was compartmentalized. Like, the metallurgists weren't talking to the propulsions people, who weren't talking to if there were biologics experts. Like, everybody was
super frustrating, because I think I don't remember exactly where that started. Again, it's 40 years ago, but I think it started with the seats. And no, it started with the actual skin of the craft, because everything looked like it was made from the same material. And I wanted some information about the skin, the superstructure of the craft. And they said, no, that's restricted. We need a reason for you to. I just want to see if everything is exactly the same material. And what I call the seats in the craft, I still don't know if they're the seats, but they might be. I think it'd be hilarious if they were actually something else. But I wanted some information on those, and that was restricted information too. There were other groups working on that. So they compartmentalized stuff so much. There was no exchange of information. So, I mean, you could submit a written response that your supervisor, in my case Dennis, would have to carry over, and they would have to approve. And, you'd get a 2 or 3 line response from the other group, but that's not how science works. Science works on the free exchange of information, and they were just killing themselves with security, and it was really frustrating. It was terribly frustrating.
So was this a function of security people that are concentrated on top security that don't truly understand how collaborative science works?
Yeah, that's it right there. You can stop right there. They had no idea how that works.
Because it stands to reason that whatever that thing was made out of probably in some way interacts with the propulsion system and whatever controls that are in it, that this material has to be particularly unique.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And I suspected the material was an electric. You know what an electric is?
No.
Like a magnet, a permanent magnet is like, it's a magnet. Right. Forever, it's a magnet.
Right.
It has a magnetic field. An electric is a material that has a permanent static field to it. A static electric field to it. And I strongly suspected that the craft is made out of an electric. And I was not, because again, that's the material science guys, I was not allowed to connect that to, but that's so important to connect it to the propulsion system and how the propulsion system interacts with the amplifier or the emitters. And I wasn't allowed, the information I needed. So it was, I don't know. It was self-defeating.
Well,
is what it was.
It seems like they were treating it like a fighter jet or an automobile. Like in an automobile, you have the outer area, the shell of the car. You have the doors, the skins, the hood, the roof, all that stuff, which is met. But then you have the propulsion system, which is the engine and the transmission and the tires and the wheels and the suspension. But they're all not connected. They're connected because they're bolted together, but they have different functions.
Right.
I think the idea or the concept, at least as I'm gathering from you, is that this thing all worked as a cohesive unit.
Right. With no physical connecting, subsystems.
And all all of it made out of the same material?
At least on the outside. All made of the same material. And the other crafts all had the same power in them. So that brings to mind, like a GM plant that makes a car with a Chevy 350 and makes, a dozen different models to it.
Right.
So that makes you think about, boy, is there a factory making these things? And, your brain can just wander off in directions, but I tried to stick with just the technology.
Did you know who the metallurgists were? The people that
I saw them. I know them. And Barry, we'd go to the lunchroom. Barry would point them out.
you weren't allowed to communicate with them at all?
Oh, hell no. You have a lab partner, which in my case was Barry, and you're allowed to talk to your lab partner, but you can't talk to any other group. That has to go through a written request, has to go to your supervisor, and he'll bring it over to them, and they'll bring it back, and so on and so forth. But that's ridiculous. That it slows down any progress you might be making.
Which is why they were probably stalled out for decades.
Yeah.
Did you ever expressly communicate to them that you theorized, at least, that this all could be connected? That there's something about the way the metal works?
Oh, we all knew that. Because we get requests from other groups, and you could tell they're desperate, just like we are, and fighting against the system.
What kind of requests would you get?
Just exactly what we found out. Where is the energy being transferred here? Reactor fires up. Is there a field present around it, or is the field just absorbed into the emitter, and you can touch the reactor itself? And just little things like that. And actually that was an important thing. When the reactor's operating, is it perfectly tuned, the emitter, to where it removes all the energy from the reactor and pushes it out the bottom? And the answer to that was no. I remember that as a specific request from one of the groups. The metallurgy group is the one that we really wanted to hear from. And some of the groups, I don't even know what some of the other groups were. But
how many groups were there?
I don't know. There were only 22 people there total, including myself. So
I would like for you to tell Joe, one of the things that also interested me, because I built the craft, is how the waveguide worked with the ceiling and the interior, and how it blended. If you can explain, there was no telescopic.
Well, this is why we wanted to talk to the metallurgist people. The reactor that sits on the bottom of the craft, a little dome over it, and there's something that looks like a pipe that's you can lift it up and take the reactor out, put the reactor in and lift it down. But like a antenna works on an old walkie-talkie. It has different sections.
There it is. There's from the video.
There. Yeah, okay. You can retract the pipe, but there's no sections, and it doesn't get any thicker. It just becomes smaller. And if you look underneath, where the emitters hang down, they turn. It doesn't buckle. It's a magical material. This is the basis of the craft. Is really the material that it's made of. It's amazing the way it works. You can push it into a smaller volume, and it doesn't change at all. It doesn't get bigger physically. I don't really know how to describe.
So you're lifting a pipe up and down, but it's not going anywhere?
Look, if you had a big pipe and you push it together, it has to get thicker.
Right.
Because the material has to go somewhere. This doesn't. Okay, it stays in exactly the same dimensions. It just becomes smaller.
How?
Well, yeah.
You couldn't talk to the metallurgist, so you have no idea.
Yeah, but those guys knew how.
They did not.
Well,
they know it didn't.
they know it did it, and that's their job. So I imagine they have more information than I did. But that was fascinating. It really was. And the waveguides that hold the emitters, they come down, and the emitters can turn and bend, and the pipes bend, and nothing changes in them. And there's no wires or anything to make the pipe bend. I'm trying to relate it to something, but I can't think of anything to relate it to.
Well, one thing that you said that I also thought was fascinating, there's no seams. So everything looks like it's 3D printed.
Again, right, it comes down to the material.
Which at the time, 3D printers weren't real, right?
Yeah, at the time that really confused me. I said, how did they build this? It must have been built out of wax or something and then melted. Because you can't build anything without seams. And then 3D printing came into existence, and you could build stuff from layers up. That made sense. Some sort of 3D printer, or they grew it, in some. Of course, it's not crystalline fashion, but I don't know how that was fabricated, but it was fabricated different than anything that we have. I don't even think it was 3D printed.
And so you never got any inkling or any understanding of what the metal was, what kind of an alloy, what it consisted of?
All I can say, it was cold to the touch because when I touched it, but I can't say if it was a ceramic or I'd say it was metal because it was cold.
Because it looks like metal. And
it looks like metal.
This is the Designs by Perry version of it. How much does that look like?
Oh, it's 100%. That's it.
Yeah, it doesn't have the first ripple supposed to be black. Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So Luigi has gone over the. I've so many times.
So,
there's an insulator ring.
Right. Jimmy, show what it looks like in the film. If you could show one of the images.
I was pulling up the trailer and it might not have been holding that back.
Oh,
yeah, on the trailer there's a ring.
Shot. Yeah, there's a ring around it, and we measured on the craft, and there was a high voltage on it. And above that ring, there is
not a good shot. There's probably this is the original trailer. It's the new trailer that would actually, that one there, and you'll get to see it right there. Actually, right after this, it's actually before this, I believe. You're gonna see the craft, and if you see, there's a black, right? There's like a black line.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first ripple. That's actually not metal.
Yeah, we call that there it is. That's a good shot. We call that the insulator ring because below that there's a high voltage present on the craft all the time, and above that there isn't.
I would imagine that your life has like two completely different chapters. Is before this and after this. Whereas like once you see it, the whole rest of your life is now going to be very different. And you are in its presence for how long did you work there for?
I don't know, maybe 6 months or so.
So for 6 months, you're around this thing. And I would imagine it's not about your thoughts 24 hours a day.
At the time it did, for sure. It's actually 3 stages to the life. It's before it, during, and after it. Before it was just my life, during was when it happened, and then the after part of my life is almost trying to dismiss it, to just go on.
Yeah, you didn't talk about it for a long time. I mean, you did the George Knapp interviews, you talked about it a little, you made some videos explaining things and how things worked.
No, I don't really like public attention, and I don't really like doing interviews. As you probably know. But I know there's people that thrive on that stuff, but I felt privileged to be part of the project, but it left me with an insatiable appetite. Oh my God, I want to know where it's going. on. Like even when I was there in the 80s, they were talking about it. So I'm dying to know, is it still there? Has it moved on to split it up and move it to other places? Yeah, I remember Barry talking about moving it to the South Pacific, like Kwajalein or something, but they said the expenses were so great they couldn't do that, but they wanted it away from everybody. And they hated the fact that it was right alongside the highway in Nevada, by south of Area 51. But that's the best place they had at the time and the most affordable. And of course now with, budgets being so tight, who knows where it is.
Well, who knows if budgets are tight for this, though?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, they did say, at whatever expense, figure this out.
Yeah, they were serious about that. We don't really care what it was. So like the original Apollo program, back in the Apollo program, if they needed parts, and if somebody had something ordered UPS or through the mail or whatever, they had the authority to stop that shipment to that other person and take their stuff if they needed it. And, they had an unlimited budget. I mean, if you're working like that, you could do anything. And,
or at least anything that's currently possible with today's technology.
There you go.
Which therein lies the problem, is that they're dealing with something that's not possible with, you couldn't build it from scratch with American technology in 1989.
No, but that's what they wanted to do. And really thinking about that now, I'm not exactly sure these guys should be allowed to do that. This is really powerful technology, and the world has really changed. I mean, we have a lot of crazy people doing stuff now, and nonsense. I don't know. This can be a very powerful, world-conquering technology. And look, for 40 years, I think I've said this before, for 40 years, all the people in control of this information have all agreed to keep it quiet. And these aren't idiots. These aren't idiots for 40 years. You have a line of people that all have agreed, no, let's not say anything. No, let's not say anything. No, let's not say anything. There has to be a reason why. And if they all agreed to that, maybe I'm the asshole. No, really, maybe they're right. And
Of the American Idiots. We are joined by our newest co-host.
Hi everyone, I'm Rabbi.
Last year after a car crash, she was rushed to the hospital and claims that she was treated like a suspect despite her independent blood and urine tests showing that she did not have any drugs or alcohol in her system. Cops say that she had slurred speech, but Rothschild says she was treated differently because of her sexual orientation and ethnicity. No charges were ever filed. The city does not comment on pending litigation. Jason Campanonia, KFIV.
Of the American Idiots. We are joined by our new biological evidence that we have of EBEs or extra biological entities. is vast. And I didn't know about it.
What's up, sluts? This is day 102 of this bitch. No one really knows for sure whether they differ Elohim Chaim, but this is the majority lived by. 3761, creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve. Chava 3631, 130, Seth, son of Adam, was born. 3526, 235, Enosh, son of Seth, was born. And Sephra Omer blessed you, Hashem, the God King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us regarding it. Counting of the Omer, today it's 5 days, the Omer made the rest of the store, holy temple in its place, speedily in our days commandments. Today is 20th of Nisan, 5786, Tuesday, April 7th. Oh, today is 6 days. Okay. Or will be tonight. I broke it out an island and my form the shape of the woman suffered to me, except for Ha'am plus Hashem, the God King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the coming of the Omer. Today is 6 days of the Omer. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the bed, and make dash into its place speedily in our days and wisdom. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the bed, and make dash to its place speedily in our days and wisdom. Cool story, bro. Is it then your story? No. Why? Because you have to do this bullshit. Did we already do this one? Dog, I don't know. I fucking forget all this shit. This is low. Very much. Well, that was cool.
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge,
What up,
and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century.
What happens when you're on and your feet start to feel numb, tingly,
should serve as a
No one
springboard
cares.
for deeper study
You don't
and
understand
reflection.
how when
And
somebody looks
hopefully
at
it
your
will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy, by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. All right, folks. Well, we're about at 5 after, I'm going to pick up with some summary from last time, so we can all be on roughly the same page. Same page of completely mysterious books that no one really understands, which is great. That said, we'll do some summary, then we'll jump into it after. I'll open up things a little bit more for questions, just in case there's some lingering questions. And again, I say questions, I mean questions I can possibly answer. If you ask me questions like, how do I make a golem, I'll tell you, I have no idea, but here are 3 books in Aramaic that'll let Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel and to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. All right, folks, so let's do some recap and let's get into the Zohar. So, as we talked about last time, Kabbalah, the technical Kabbalah, the Kabbalah proper really begins to exist in southern France and Spain in the early 13th century. Now, it's really important that it isn't kind of whole cloth, right? That's the whole point of this class, that we've been tracing how Jewish mysticism has developed in the world of Palestine, in the world of Babylonia, in the world of Jewish magic in Egypt. And we've been tracing how that's being slowly moving into the European context. And it's in that situation, beginning in the early 13th century, maybe the late 12th century, that Kabbalah begins to exist as such. And as we talked about last time, some of the driving issues, and I don't want to say the only driving issues, but some of the more important driving issues are, one, a response against the philosophy of Maimonides, right? We like to claim Maimonides, especially as progressive Jews, as sort of a beacon of enlightenment, but Maimonides, as I pointed out last time, was incredibly polarizing. Maimonides was not universally accepted by many Jews. There were many Jews that hated him and literally turned his book over to the Dominicans to have them burned.
Didn't we already
Of
watch
course, that
this?
was a pretty bad idea, because when the Dominicans were like, "Hey, you have these heretical books. We want to burn them. Can we burn some more books?" And of course, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel and to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. All right, folks. Well, welcome back. Let's do a little bit of recapping and what we got through in part one of this talk about the Sefer Zohar, which again is one of the most intimidating books that I know of. People talk about how the phenomenology of spirit by Hegel is intimidating. I don't know, the phenomenology of spirit is like Fisher Price compared to the Zohar, at least in my opinion, trying to understand it. So as we went through last time, the Sefer Zohar, the Book of Radiance, is a mystical midrash, and midrashic literature is just a kind of literature that is sometimes described as Jewish jazz. Not that there aren't Jewish jazz musicians, but it's sort of like medieval Jewish jazz at the literary level. It's where a person will take a piece of scripture and then riff on it, and then someone will riff on that riff, and someone will riff on that riff until you get something that's completely unrecognizable. But the idea is that if you know the guy that knew the riff and he ripped off this riff and that riff came from this riff, and if you can do that to the genealogy, the same way jazz musician historians can do, midrash works a lot like that in the Jewish literary world. And so what we have is a kind of mystical midrash, which is sometimes largely a commentary on various sections of the Bible, although the Zohar is very uneven. Some stuff, like Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, or whatever how you want to translate it, that verse gets dozens and dozens and dozens of pages, right? And some other texts don't get much at all. So it's very uneven. It's composed of actually several different works combined together, and we talked about some of those minor works within the Zohar, which are self-contained units. Those self-contained units can be very accessible. The Sava or the Yanuka, those sections are relatively accessible. Other sections like the Sifra Ditzniuta, which is only 8 pages or so, 8 dafim, is completely a mystery. It's one of the most difficult texts in all of Kabbalistic history. There have been dozens and dozens of commentaries written on it. It emerged in the 13th century in the circle of a fellow named Moshe de Leon, who we think is the principal author, but we now, scholars think that there are lots of other folks' hands on this document as well. Though in the traditional world, in the Orthodox world, it gets its legitimacy because it's actually, according to them, traceable back to Shimon Bar Yochai, the 2nd century sage. And what's important about that is on their way of telling the story, right? So the academic progressive story is that it was composed in Spain, in the area of Leon, which is in northern Spain, Castile, in the 13th century over a course of about 10 years, beginning around 1270 or so, a little after maybe. The traditional story, the Orthodox story, is that no, it was actually composed by Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century, and it was only revealed to the world in the 13th century, so that it existed the entire time. It just had only been revealed to the world by Moshe de Leon and his circle. And some of the core concepts that we dealt with last time are maybe two of the more difficult concepts to grasp, and one of those is Ein Sof. And this is God and God's most transcendent state, which is to say that you can't say anything about this conception of God. This is a
stories on that because using field A as just to identify the border of the field that is being sold. eBay is signing up his documents. eBay signing up his documents. In this transaction is not so what should have said so to speak, solidify his ownership of the field. Hey, in this case, the ones really sold some son of this type of shard, which used the contested field as a border for the field sold. Everyone used that let's go. There's a document that says that one of the story, perhaps
It's a conception of God that's completely transcendent. Nothing is true of it, and you can only talk about it in the negative. So this is a way that you can do philosophy with Kabbalah. Remember that in a big way, Kabbalah, the Zohar, is trying to answer a lot of the same kinds of questions that were relevant in medieval Europe at the time, theologically and philosophically. And one of those questions is, can a being beyond all adjectives, beyond all predicates, can we even talk about such a being? And Maimonides famously said, no, all you can do is say God isn't wise, because God is wise in a way that you can't possibly understand. And so comparing your wisdom to God's wisdom is blasphemy, and therefore you must say that God isn't wise, or perhaps you could say, you could speak in double negatives and say God isn't ignorant. right? And so if God is infinitely non-ignorant, then we can infer from that logically that God is all-knowing. Something like that. So this being, Ein Sof, whatever it is beyond all understanding. Now, obviously, it doesn't err because if it ended there, we would not be here, right? They must have created this world. And so that process by which that happens is through the sphirot, the numerations. And how to translate this word is so difficult. That's why in most cases you just see that it's left in the Hebrew. But it literally means something like numerations. It doesn't mean number because we have a word in Hebrew for number. It's mispar. And so it's not that. That's the standard noun you would derive from the root of safar. But it's not. It's sphirot. It's in the plural, and so it means something like numerations. And these numerations, there are 10 of them, although we've seen other earlier Kabbalists had up to 13. And these are transcendental emanations of the divine. Now, that's just a really complicated way of saying that these are parts of God that flow out of Ein Sof. They flow out of that no-thingness. They flow out of the vast emptiness of the Godhead. And they flow out, and there are discrete moments in the development of the Godhead, right? God is a process, not a thing in Kabbalah. And so as these things develop, you can tease them out. You say, oh, that's one. And that one's different than this one because of this. And that one's different than that one because of that. You can see how these things are different because they're different parts of the dynamic process by which God comes into being. And one way of thinking about Kabbalah, all of Kabbalah, is to imagine that Kabbalah is basically dedicated to the emergence, the development, the dynamism, and the external and internal relationship of the Sefirot, and also the relationship of the Jewish people via Jewish law to the Sefirot. And we'll see that in a big way tonight. Because what's really important to grasp about the Sefirot in the Kabbalah, especially in the Sefer Zohar, is that there's absolutely no way of thinking about what they are without thinking about what Israel is, and thinking about how Israel interacts with Jewish law, and that interaction with Jewish law has a direct bearing on the metaphysical structure of reality. We're going to get to the idea of Tikkun Olam tonight, or at least a version of it, and as you'll see, it had nothing to do originally with giving to the poor. It had everything to do with you give to the poor because that act of tzedakah, right, that act of righteousness, readjusts the dynamism of the Godhead and corrects the nature of God and aligns it in such a way that it brings about unused state of affairs, maybe even a messy, unique state of affairs. So this is the two big ideas we covered last time. What is the Zohar? How was it composed? Who composed it? Those are all big, complicated questions that we had not solved until the early 20th century, the mid-20th century anyway. We're still solving it. The original state of God is Ein Sof, without end or no thingness. And then the bridge that emerges out of Ein Sof that reaches down to our world in the form of the Sefirot, or these numerations. At first, appear, of course, in the Sefer Yetzirah. Any questions from last time? Feel people like to ask questions I can't possibly feel, like why 10 and not 50? Because the Sefer Yetzirah says 10, not 11, 10, not 9. That's why. Yeah, Eric.
So perhaps it's a trivial question, but I see Ein Sof sometimes written A-I-N, which sounds more like Ayin, or also E-I-N. It's probably just a variant, not a difference in the two.
So you would think, and there's a complicated pun at work in Hebrew actually. So Ein Sof written with one way of spelling with an aleph and one way of spelling it with an ayin can result in two different meanings of the word. So Ein Sof means without end, infinite. It's a negation. But the word ayin with an ayin, right? Nothing. So it means nothing, nothingness. And so there's a compoundness. Now, what you can do is you can, and we'll see in a minute with the word keter, they'll pun on this, but one of the problems is sort of the Hanukkah problem. How many different ways can you spell Hanukkah in English? Well, a lot, because there's no way of figuring it with the dagesh, those letters in the word Hanukkah. But there is a complex pun going on here too, right? So homophonically, it can sound like the nothingness, but also it can sound like without end. And so there'll be a lot of ideas about the idea of God as a kind of divine nothingness, which for the Jewish Buddhists out there, the Jew-Buddhists, Kabbalah and Jewish Buddhism they get along pretty well.
So I guess I have a follow-up question, and I mean, we're not in 13th century Spain, so I just wonder about the pronunciation of Hebrew and Aramaic in an environment that was, neighboring, and for a good chunk of time, people had, Arabic-speaking neighbors who were part of, Arabic kingdoms of Iberia. I'm wondering if they were distinguishing the pronunciation of the way, like, many Hebrew would, or if it's like, a lot of modern dialects of Hebrew where you don't hear the difference. So it's just a written difference. I don't know what was going on in it still.
I have to be. In terms of historical linguistics, I really have no idea. My sense of it is that Sephardic Hebrew, at least now, doesn't make a distinction. Now, I don't know when that distinction was lost. I mean, even in the Talmud, they talk about people who aren't making a distinction back then. They're pronouncing ayin and aleph as the same, and that's the thing all the way back in the Babylonian Talmud. So my guess is that Sephardi Jews, of whom Moshe de Leon wasn't making a distinction. But and it's interesting, right? Because the pun only works if you don't make a distinction. If you pronounce ayin and ayin as the same, and not ayin and rayan. Because if you do pronounce those two consonants, and those are, right, that's a different, one's a glottal stop and one's a voiced frinkle fricative. If you do pronounce those differently, then the pun doesn't work. So my sense is because they liked that pun, they were reading them identically, despite the fact that Hebrew could have been spoken like. And this also requires knowing something about how Rabbi Arabic was spoken, and I certainly don't know anything about that. So my sense is that because that pun is possible to them, and no one criticizes the pun, then they must be pronouncing the two letters the same. I guess, but I'm not a historical linguist. I don't know. Again, that would require me to know things about Rabbi Hebrew or Rabbi Arabic and Iberian Hebrew in the 13th century. That definitely is well. Other questions before we jump into the Sefirot? Alright, folks, there it is. The image that I think most folk who have some knowledge of Kabbalah, who've even heard of Kabbalah, have seen this image dozens of times. This is the classic image. If you just Google Kabbalah, this is what's going to come up. And I put off putting it up because the reason why I put off putting it up is because I don't want you to get fixated on it. Because this is the image that has locked into people's mind that all of Kabbalah is this. It's about the 10 Sefirot and the tree of configuration. And it's not. Kabbalah is much more sophisticated. It's much bigger than this. And even this alignment that you see here on the screen right now is an ideal alignment. This alignment will never happen in our lifetime unless the Messiah comes. In the Zohar, they are very clear, the writers of the text are very clear, that this alignment is a perfectly balanced vision of what the Sefirot are. And it's very clear from the writer of the Zohar that that's not the case, because the world isn't perfect. So what you're seeing is an ideal representation of the Sefirot, not as they are, not as they ever have been, ever in all of history, but as they will be in the Messianic era, right? By Yom HaHu, when Hashem's name is one, right? When everything is unified. Then they will look like this, but not until then. So one of the things I just want to screw up in people's minds is that this is what the Sefirot look like. They don't look like this in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar. They do not look like this. Because if they did, our world would look very different. Because our world and the supernal world in the Zohar mirror each other. And if our world's out of whack, if anything has happened bad to you today, if anything's bad to happen to anything at all, then that means that the supernal world's also out of whack. Which means these relationships are not in relationship. So the thing that I just want to, again, I want to pound this drum. The thing I want to pound out this drum is that this is an ideal representation of the Sefirot. not how they are. They're always in an inner dynamic relationship, right? God is sort of polyamorously in a relationship with God's self, and all the various people, entities within God's self are always out of whack. So what is it that's out of whack? Let's go through them quickly, right? The first spherode, right? You see how this is open at the top? Because that's open to Ein Sof. Everything emerged. So from above here, be nothing. And yet here was everything. Ein Sof is up here. And then the first thing to emerge was the crowd of God. The first apparent thing of God. So this thing, this crown, is the inner glory of God. It's the first moment of God's divine will. Because in order for there to be anything, there must be intentionality. And that inner intentionality of God, the first stirring. I mean, this is a part of you. Have folks ever woke up before their alarm? Like before your alarm goes off? The thing that made you get up before your alarm, the thing that's not even conscious to you, it wasn't like you consciously decided to get up before your alarm. It's that something arose in you to stir you into consciousness, before consciousness. Imagine this is the thing that gets up before God's alarm goes off, right? Keter is that thing. It's not conscious. It's completely unknowable. You can never know the thing that stirred you to get up 1 second before your alarm. But something stirred inside you in your primordial consciousness. That first thing is Keter, and we can know nothing about it. Except for it must have happened. We can logically deduce it because things are here. Keter is completely unknowable. And as you can see here, right, at the top, it says I am nothingness. Because it's a kind of knowable nothingness. Ein Sof is an unknowable nothingness. Keter is a knowable nothingness. Now, in order to wake up, when you wake up, you immediately come into consciousness. But if you've ever had a sort of surprise wake up, your consciousness happens to you like a flash. Everything's like, right? Like your Google map, your Google timesheet shows up, your calendar and your emails and everything. It's like a flash of everything that you have to do for the day. That momentary flash that isn't even consciousness is chokhmah. It's pure, undiluted consciousness that's completely just a flash of everything that you know all at once. Now, obviously, you can't dwell in chokhmah because it's like everything that you know coming at you all at once is a gestalt. You have to parse things out. You have to analytically think, all right, now I have to get up, now I have to get the kids up, now I have to write this email, now I have to do this and do this and do this and this. Your consciousness has to be compartmentalized into analytical structures. That analytification, that sounds like a real word, that analytification of God's consciousness is Binah. It's God's intelligence at some level, or God's understanding, right, as opposed to God's wisdom. So the flash and then the analyticalization of that flash. And you can see how these happen immediately. They're not brief moments. They're not like long period drawn out. These are like logical reductions from each other. We'll come back to Da'at in a minute. Da'at's a weird sphera. Immediately flowing from Binah, we have Chesed. Chesed is the immediate moment where if you're doing things right, you know everything you have to do in the day. What is the first thing you should do? Take care of yourself. You know you got a lot to do. What's the first thing you should do? Make some breakfast. Get some coffee. Take care of yourself. This is Chesed. This is the part of you that's loving kindness, pure loving kindness. But if you stay in loving kindness, you're never going to get anything done. You can't just love yourself all day. And how do you do that? You judge yourself. I got to get to work. I got to write this email. Oh, this email feel bad. This guy's bothering me on the email. So what do you switch to now? Judgment. You have to move out of the world of chesed to the world of judgment. And judgment is a part of you that judges. It says, this is worth doing, that's not worth doing. This is the email I'm not going to respond to. Like, I don't like this guy. Who cares what he says? It's judgment. Judgment, when it's unchecked by chesed, that's evil. If you're just pure judgment, that's terrifying. Because pure judgment, unchecked by any loving kindness, can just be violent, vengeful rage. And in fact, in the Kabbalah, as we'll see tonight, this is where evil comes from. Imagine a bowl flowing from Binah to Chesed, right? And then chesed flows immediately to gevura. Gevura, imagine gevura flows out a little bit. Pure, unchecked judgment flows out. That pure, unchecked judgment that flows out of gevura, that's evil. We'll get to evil tonight. Now, when all of these things are in balance, all these upper spheres are in balance, that forms the most beautiful thing imaginable. The balance between justice and mercy, between analytical thought and pure insight, between the divine nothingness, that is Tiferet. It's the perfect balance of everything that can be made. Because you know how to judge, you know how to love, you know how to think, you know how to be wise. And Tiferet is the womb of creation. Everything becomes balanced in the womb of creation. From Tiferet, we have Netzach and Hod. Netzach and Hod are very strange little spheres that don't get enough attention, but I think they're very interesting. This is the fact that you have to persist. When you get perfectly balanced, I don't know about you, folks ever gone to the gym and you meet your like fitness goals, or you reach your intellectual goals, or you reach whatever goals you have and you want to stay there? You can't stay there. You have to continue to grow. Netzach is the part of you that continues to grow. It's a part of you that pushes you a little further than you think you can go. And then Hod is the part that's a little more inward, right? Because if you think you can only grow, you have nothing but blind ambition, well, that's unbalanced. So you need to check it. And what do you check it with? You turn inward. You become introverted. In many ways, Netzach is the principle of God's extrovertedness, and Hod is the principle of God's introvertedness. Those come together in Yesod. And Yesod is something like absolute divine unity, concentration. Everything comes together in Yesod, and this is God processing. God is processing outward. There's outward momentum. Balanced, of course, right? Because that's how we imagine this thing. Although it's never balanced like this. It's balanced between God's exuberance and God's interiority. I'm a very introverted person. Rabbi Alana, as you may know, is an extroverted person. Imagine the two of us combined. We have some out of a very curly beard, more hair than I have. Both of these things combined is Yesod. This is the phallus of the divine. But the phallus of the divine isn't balanced. And so what must be matched to it? The vagina of the divine. The vulva, the core vagina of the divine. And Shekhinah fold in upon each other. You must think about this thing in the three dimensions. They fold in on one another. And into that folding flows out pure Shekhinah. And you can see here, it's open at the bottom, almost like a womb, right? It's open at the bottom. And you are here. This is where our world is, in the world of Malchut. Malchut is kingship. I think better queenship. Because the Shekhinah is how we interact with God in this realm. In this part of power, in this part of reality. We only really approach God as Shekhinah, as the feminine form of God. And so here, this is the area of reception and expansion of God's power. This is the womb grows to hold the child. God is expanding. This is the part of God that receives all of the other spherotes. And not only that, but God, everything that expands must contract. And so we are in the world of Malchut. We receive the law. This will be very important in a moment. We receive the Torah. What do we do with the Torah? We become pregnant with the Torah. We become wedded to God. Israel always female, right? In the idea of Kabbalah, Israel is always female. We are wedded to God. We catch, in some ways, this divine procession, and then by following Jewish law, we throw it back. Right? So it's not just that Malchut and Shekhinah are passive feminine. That idea is not a Kabbalistic idea. It's not passive feminine that Shekhinah is. Shekhinah is also receiving, but very importantly, projecting, processing back up, recessing back up. And everything we do down here gets mirrored back up the entire structure. This is the Kabbalistic solution for the problem we mentioned last time. How do you bridge the infinite and the finite? You start from the infinite recess of Ein Sof, way up here above Keter. There are these dynamic moments flowing down all the way to Shekhinah, and then Shekhinah bounces them all the way back up. And that procession and recession continues as long as it must continue until everything is balanced. And that balance, achieving that balance, is the goal of Kabbalah. That's it. It's not your denial of your ego. It's not your obliteration of design. It's not you being whatever, because it's not thought about it. It's you. It's not about you. This text imagines Israel doing this. The thing here that's at work is the balancing of the structure back to the Zohar's mind. When you read the Zohar, that's the goal. It's achieving metaphysical, cosmic, interior, communal balance. That's a metaphysical thing, it's a physical thing, all those things, all those things are part of God. So, this is the image you've seen. This is the image I'm sure you've seen of the Sefirot, and that is the 2-minute, 3-minute explanation of what's going on there. Now again, what I want to drive home about this is that this is never balanced. It's never balanced. Because if it were balanced, right, Gevura, we would not live in a world in which there was suffering and violence. Now, that's not to say that in the perfect world there won't be some kind of violence. There might be all kinds of violence. It just might be that that balance is matched by chesed. Because again, the writer of the Zohar doesn't imagine that in the perfect world the death penalty will go away. It just imagines it will be executed properly. Because in Jewish law, which is the perfect example of law according to the Zohar, there are death penalty cases. There's 4 modes of the death penalty. You can be beheaded, you can be burned, stoned, and strangled to death. So the Zohar imagines that people will be executed even in a perfect world. But their execution will be just. It will be part of Gevura, being punished, being done correctly. So, again, don't put your liberal, progressive, woke ideas on the Zohar. Just don't do it, because that's not the way it imagines a world. What's important is to imagine the way it imagines a world. It, the Torah, the laws of Moses, revealed by God, are how this gets balanced out. We'll come back to that more in just a moment. Let's talk about the Shekinah. Sorry for the text being so small on this slide. I'm not sure why. Not the reason why it is because it's my fault. I put too many text on one slide. It's very simple. The word for Shekinah is actually coming from the word for to dwell or to settle. The Shekinah is the thing about God, the part of God, the aspect of God that settles amongst the world. It's a part of God that exists at our register of reality. And this idea has a couple of different historically important precursors that I just want to mention. The first is that you may know this, but you may not, that in the earliest instances of the discussion of Yahweh, Yahweh had a wife. There are really early images of Yahweh actually having a consort or a wife, and this being Asherah. The earliest depictions we have of Yahweh actually depict this being as having had a wife. And so early on in Israelite literature, there's always a very difficult relationship with the idea that God could have a feminine consort. And one way of dealing with that was to condemn everything dealing with femininity and everything dealing with the feminine aspect of God, especially Asherah, and punishing the worship of Asherah. The other thing you can do with that is sublimate that. Good old classic Freudian terms. What that means is that there are all kinds of aspects of God that sort of get divinized, particularly God's wisdom. And if you've ever read the book of Proverbs, there's a long section where wisdom becomes almost a kind of feminine God, where she's described as perfect and beautiful, and she's contrasted with the alien woman, the Isha Zara. But there's an idea that wisdom can be personified and maybe even deified, and that going to become hugely important in the Zohar later. Also, the idea that God has a kind of presence in the world that's distinct at some level from God. That God can appear as the angel of the Lord, or God can appear as a fire coming down the mountain, or dwelling in the Mishkan, or as a pillar of fire during the day. There is an idea that God's manifestation in the world can be different than God somehow. That there are two possibilities of the reality of God. And what ends up happening by the time of the Babylonian Talmud is that this term for the presence of God is sometimes referred to as the Shekhinah. This is the presence of God. Literally, the word means presence or indwelling. And while the noun here is in the feminine gender in Hebrew, it's never the case in the Talmud that they think of the Shekhinah as a woman, as a feminine gendered, woman gendered entity. because they just think of it as a grammatically feminine noun, not as a woman. So as you might imagine, when the Zohar, part of what the Zohar is going to do is the Zohar and the Sefer here are going to be mystical, not in that they read things in very elaborate, very obtuse ways, they'll do that too, but how they read things very literally. And if the text says Shekhinah, and if Shekhinah is in the feminine gender, it must be feminine. Full stop. It just is. It's not just a grammatical reality, it's an ontological reality. And what we'll see in the Talmud, that it is the case that there often is bridal language used. So, for instance, one of the things that you may know is that there are a couple of books of the Bible that the rabbis were always very, very, very nervous about. One of those was Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes. Another one of those books that the Bible was very concerned about was Esther, because it never mentions God. And another one of those books the Bible was very concerned about was the Song of Songs, because it's about teenagers having sex, and that seems weird. So the rabbi said, look, it's not about teenagers having sex, it's about the relationship between God and Israel. Well, if God is the masculine partner in that relationship, well, what does that leave Israel? Well, it leaves Israel the feminine partner. Well, some further speculation said, well, no, it's not Israel being feminine, it's another part of God. And so we have this idea developing over time, and there could be an entire long series of lectures on the development of Shekhinah. But we see that over the course of about 1,000 years, this concept goes from being a grammatical construct with an element of God living in the world to being an ontological metaphysical construct with actually God being feminine. So there's a lot of complicated things going on in that. Also, what's worth pointing out here, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, is that in the old Gnostic mythology, the mythology that developed primarily in texts like the Apocrypha of John and some other texts as well, and the Nag Hammadi library in the larger Gnostic world, the Gnostics, as you may remember, were a group of Jews and Christians and pagans who believed that knowledge, as opposed to faith, liberated you from this world. That if you knew certain kinds of things about this world, you could escape from it, and that's what it's knowledge saving you as opposed to faith saving you or belief saving you. In the Gnostic worldview, there was a divine emanation scheme, just somewhat similar to what we find in Kabbalah later, and similar to Neoplatonic stuff and Middle Platonic stuff, where God flows out of God's self, and at the very last rung of that process, there's a disaster. And that very last entity called Sophia, wisdom, a very similar entity we find in the book of Proverbs. And Sophia wants to create something without reference to the divine world, and she ends up creating an abomination. This thing is called Yaldabaoth, which is probably a Hebrew word that means chaos child. And the text describes it as a living abortion. Something really dreadful about that idea. But it's alive and not alive. It's ignorant and blind, chaotic. And it creates an entire world to mirror itself and its insanity, and that world is our world. Our world is the world of that evil entity, and the world is just a prison for us. It's a giant trap. And so what ends up happening, and not to rehearse this too much, is that there seems to be some good evidence to say that elements of that kindology survived in Judaism a lot longer than it survived in Christianity. We see similar elements to that in the Sefer by here, where it describes wisdom, chokhmah, as a maiden from a far-off land or a maiden from a foreign land cast into our world. So we think there may be connections all the way back to the late classical world and this Gnostic worldview, which again, that term is a bit problematic in a lot of ways. But we think that maybe the term emerged from that milieu. The last thing I want to say about the origins of the Shekhinah are two things. One is we're living in 13th century Spain. If you know anything about courtly culture, idolizing remote women is all the rage in troubadour literature. It's all about the ideal woman who's completely virginal, and you have to sing all these praises to her, but you can never have her. This courtly literature is a huge part of Spanish literature, both at the literary level, but also at the troubadour level. And so there's an enormous outpouring of infinite longing for the unapproachable woman. And so we have that happening at the literary level and at the musical level, the popular level. Also, the other thing I should point out here that's also very important is at the same time that this is going on in the Jewish world, the Marian cult in the Catholic world in Spain is also getting steam. The adoration of the Virgin Mary was not always a big deal in the same way that it is now. That really began in Spain, and the adoration of the Virgin Mary was very, very popular. And so there's some reason to believe that the adoration of the Virgin Mary, that the Shekhinah, the development of that, may have been a Jewish response to the larger hegemonic culture, where the Jewish response was, look, they're trying to convert a bunch of us, and what's really popular is this whole Virgin Mary thing. Well, we got that. It's not even Virgin Mary. We got God. God's a woman. God does all the stuff, the cool stuff Virgin Mary does. And so if you read the Zohar carefully, a lot of the stuff it says about the Shekhinah looks a lot like the kind of stuff that developed in the Marian cult. And so unsurprisingly, the minority culture is mirroring in a very sort of hybridity way, something like Homi Baba, that they're hybridizing the Marian cult and developing a hybridized version of it, and that hybridized version, leaning on their tradition, becomes the Shekhinah. There's a lot of debate about that, but I find it to be a very convincing analysis, especially when you take some post-colonial studies and apply it at some level to that stuff. I think it makes a very compelling point about the origin of Shekhinah being something that's developed in Judaism as a response to in larger Spanish culture, both literarily and song, but also with the Marian cult. And again, we use the word cult here not to diminish their religiosity. It's just we use the word religious studies, we use the word cult to indicate a very specific kind of attention, religious attention. It's in the Zohar that the Shekhinah becomes an explicitly feminine aspect of God. In the Sefer Bahir, we have echoes of this, we have murmurs of this, but it's in the Zohar that it's no doubt that there is a definitively feminine aspect of God, and at some level, that's the aspect of God that human beings deal with. And this 10th Sefirah, Malchut, the world of indwelling, the world of kingdom, is often tied to Rachel, who's, as you probably know, is associated with mourning. And so the world of Malchut is associated with color black because of Rachel. All of the various Sefirot are associated with colors, with matriarchs and patriarchs. They're all associated with all kinds of parts of the body, as you probably saw in the diagram. There's all kinds of things they get associated with. What the writer of the Zohar does is something very interesting. When they want to find where the Shekhinah is, they will rely on the fact that any time you see the word et in Hebrew, et, as you may know for folks who know some Hebrew, et is a direct object marker in Hebrew. It doesn't get translated. So if you want to see it, for instance, in the very beginning of Genesis, I have the very first part of the first verse of Genesis here, right? Bereshit bara Elohim es hashamayim ve'haaretz. So Bereshit bara, in the beginning, he made, namely God, what? Et. Let me check my pronunciation to be correct, academic Hebrew. Et. God created et. Now, to read this grammatically correctly, you would say, in the beginning, who created? God, Elohim, gods. Et, direct object marker. What did God create? Hashemayim ve'haaretz. God created the heavens, and first a direct object marker, the earth. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. No, because the Torah would never just throw words around. So the et here, Aleph Tav and Aleph Tav, cannot just be superfluous. They can't just be random direct object markers. What are they? It's the Shekhinah. It's the Shekhinah. And so they say, no, this is the world of the Shekhinah, that this world perhaps is the world of the Sefirot, and that after the Shekhinah is Hashemayim ve'haaretz. The heavens come first, and then Shekhinah dwells in the earth, the Aretz. And so what we have here, right, in the Eretz, so we have is a very Kabbalistic reading, also an incredibly literalistic reading of the Bible, where a direct object marker, et, is not just a direct object marker. It's the creation of the emanation of Shekhinah into the heavens, and then further the Shekhinah into the earth, into the world of Malchut, into the world, our world. They make a lot of big deal about this. The Zohar is all about this because it means that Shekhinah dwells in the heavens and she dwells in the earth. And that's in our world. And notice who does not dwell in our world? Elohim. Right? Elohim, and certainly doesn't bara. Because bara is creation with no subject doing the creating. It's just he creates, or creates, you could say. What creates? Nothing. Right? In the beginning, nothing created. What did nothing create? Elohim. The Sefirot, and then what flowed from them? Shekhinah, and where is Shekhinah? Hashemayim v'et haaretz. For the Kabbalists, for the Zohar, they see the entire structure of the Sefirot echoed in the first 6 words of the Bible.
I want to welcome you to Dream Chasers Radio.
Not because they're reading things out of it that are unusual, but rather because they're reading it incredibly literally. So, what's fascinating about this is that, again, it shows you something about how the Zohar works in terms of Kabbalistic hermeneutics, and also why this text is very difficult, because if you don't read Hebrew very well, and you don't understand Hebrew grammar very well, then this is all basically lost on you, or could be lost on you. So what's going to happen in all of this is that the world of Malchut is joined with the supernal world in what is called Yichud, or unification. This is kind of a sacred marriage. And what's going to happen according to the world of our world, is that the task of our world is to take the Shekhinah, which is in exile. This idea that God's presence in an exile is found in the Talmud. When Israel goes into exile, into the Galut, so does Shekhinah go into the Galut. And our task is to reunify the Shekhinah, which is in Galut, in this world, with the supernal world. And as we do that with the process of Jewish law, it's the case that we remarry Shekhinah, and Shekhinah remarries the upper world, and then everything is like a giant lock, and it all clicks into place, and ultimately everything is resolved. Everything, the imbalance is resolved. Now, why does that imbalance happen? The Zohar never says. And as we get later on, next time, into Lurianic Kabbalah, we will learn why, according to at least Lurianic Kabbalah, why the primordial imbalance happens. And we'll get a big drama about why it happened. We'll get to it next time. So what ends up happening here is that we are plunged into matter, and we have to return back by redeeming matter. Now, what's different about, for instance, Kabbalah and maybe Gnostic texts is that there's nothing wrong with matter. It just needs to be redeemed. Just like a coupon. There's nothing wrong with a coupon, but a coupon needs to get redeemed. And so the idea is that you redeem matter. Not that you rescape it, not that you betray it, not that you get rid of it. It's not bad or evil, but it's in need of redemption. And how does that redemption happen? It happens through this spiritual process of being reunified with the supernal world. Even what happened in the Garden of Eden, that really went awry, it's not really clear what went awry, is that there's some indication, at least in some sections of the Zohar, that what ended up happening was that Adam became so infatuated with the supernal world that he abandoned his material life, that Adam was actually too pious. So notice it's a complete inversion of the Garden of Eden story. In the Garden of Eden story, it's that, in the original version, it's that human beings are too worldly, they're too sexual. And that version is that they committed sex or whatever, they did some kind of thing or whatever, that being focused too much on their bodies would mess them up. No, in the Zohar version, Adam is actually too fixated on the Shekhinah, and his partner, Chava, life, physical world, feels abandoned by him. She's not satisfied by him. She's not he's not doing his duty, and that's what allows her to be seduced by the Nachash, by the snake. And so the traditional version is all the blame put on her. She gets tricked by the snake. But in the Zohar's version, at least one version of the Zohar's version, it's his fault. He's a negligent husband. He's so focused on the supernal world that he's not focusing on the physical world, which is his world. The physical world is our world. And the Zohar is very clear about this. You cannot focus just on the spiritual world. You cannot become a monk. There's no mystical Kabbalistic monks. You are obliged to deal in this world. And it's only by dealing in this world that you can actually deal with the spiritual world. So again, how does this get fixed? Well, Moses eventually comes and gives us the Ten Commandments and gives us the Torah. And it's by combining the spiritual and the physical. Again, the Zohar is all about balance. Combine the spiritual and the physical, that we begin to climb the ladder again. Adam focused too much on the world of the supernal. Other patriarchs focused too much on the world of the terrestrial, and the ideas we must combine them into one another. And this becomes incredible. The language here is always incredibly sexual. The language is, the Zohar is very at home with sexual language. Because sex is part of human life. Sex is part of religious observance. You have to have sex. You're obliged to be fruitful and multiply. And again, it imagines of course, it's imagining a very hyper heteronormative way of thinking about this. Although I think at the edges of the text, there's a lot of interesting homoeroticism, and there's a lot of queering stuff that one can do with the Zohar in a way that I think is very, very rich. And not that I think it's queer people, trans people have done incredible things with the Zohar that have shown this text is hyper heteronormative, but at the same time, many of the ideas it commits itself to don't conform to that. It can't logically. And so there's been all kinds of cool studies to show that those categories break down pretty rapidly when you get a little bit under the hood or under the sheets of what's going on. And the Zohar, there's a lot more happening here. Well, the idea ultimately is that there's a kind of sacred marriage between Israel and the Shekhinah and Israel, the Sephirot, and by the observance on the Jewish law as a kind of ritual act of intercourse. The observance of law is kind of thought of as a kind of intercourse, that as you do the law, you are kind of having spiritual intercourse with the divine, because it's only because the Jews have a covenant with God, a marriage contract with God, that they can do the things they can do. The only similarity to that in Jewish custom is sex. It's only by having a certain kind of relationship with a certain kind of person that you can have sex with them. Well, because God and Israel have this relationship, then it must be the case that all of these 613 rules are fundamentally a kind of intercourse with the divine. And so it's all incredibly in erotic terms. And so this is very much linked to things like Shabbat. And as we'll see next time, Shabbat becomes incredibly linked, and Kabbalah is sort of the core observance. In fact, if you've ever done Kabbalah Shabbat, which I imagine most people in this class have, Kabbalah Shabbat is a completely invented service by 16th century Kabbalists to reenact the marriage between God and Israel every single week. So if you've ever sung Lechadodi, that's the reason why you sing it. It's because you're getting married every week to the Shabbat bride. And that idea comes directly back from Zohar, and it's become so ingrained in Jewish customs that it's now a service that basically every Jew does every week. They do. In fact, I would say even liberal Jews, if they only go to shul once a week on Friday nights, they're doing Lechadodi, they're doing Kabbalah Shabbat. So they're doing the Hieros Gamos, they're doing the sacred marriage as it is understood here in the Kabbalah. Now, this hyper focus on sex is probably a dig at the Catholics. One of the things that Judaism did have going for it, that Catholicism didn't, is that Catholicism is really down on sex. I don't know if you know this about people. They like sex. People love sex. It's a big thing. They like it. They get down on it. People pay for it. People sell it. It's a big part of the internet. It may be the reason why the internet exists, basically. We may just be piggybacking on like video games and sex. So I think that's actually true. It's probably we piggyback on military intelligence, Pornhub, and video games. And I think now video games and military intelligence are probably the same thing too. At any rate, it's very much the case that part of this whole attitude towards sex, this very hyper heteronormative and very much in the marriage environment, but it's also the case that this is probably a dig at Christianity, because Christianity is all about priestly celibacy, it's all about the perpetual virginity of Mary, and it's all about the fact that Jesus and Paul were never married, and I suppose never had sex. And the Jews at the time, the rabbis at the time, are like, yeah, that sucks. Sucks for them. They got to be celibate. Mary never got to have sex, or at least she only had sex with God, kind of, or whatever. And Jesus and Paul never got married, never had sex. Like, they're inferior. Even the average rabbi down the street doing some Kabbalah gets laid at least once a week. And your God never got laid? Pity for your God. Right? Your main prophet, Paul, was like, hated his body, hated having sex. Something wrong with him. It's like, we ain't got that kind of problem around here. So I think also a lot of this hypersexual stuff going on in the Zohar is also a dig at Christianity. I think it's a dig at Catholicism, and I think it's a dig at their relationship to the physical body at some level. And again, part of it's about maintaining your Jewish community and saying, yeah, you can have sex. It's great to have sex. In fact, you're obligated to have sex. You've got to have sex. But know that your sex is part of this mystical thing, and it's very carefully constrained, right? So those things are also true as well. Now, if there's good stuff, like sex, there's also bad stuff. Of course, that's evil. And evil, in the Kabbalah, is thought of as part of God. This is called the Sitra Achra, the other side. Now, what's important to know about the history of evil in the Jewish world and in the Christian world is that evil in the classical theologies of both these worlds was thought of as basically a kind of privation. That evil was something like cold. Cold is just a lack of heat. Darkness is just a lack of light. Darkness is nothing on its own. Cold is nothing on its own. And so because these things are just negations of something else, they don't really exist. So evil is just a non-existent place where God isn't. It's a part of you that rebels against God. It's part of your heart, according to Augustine, that rebels against God. You empty your heart of the divine grace, and that emptiness inside your own heart, that God-shaped hole, that's evil. And because Satan is just a pure rebellion, Satan's just pure negation. Well, this is true of Neoplatonism. It's true of lots of different traditions within Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The rabbis of the Kabbalah, especially in the Castilian Kabbalah, Zohar, say, no, evil is real. And it's hard to imagine why a medieval Jew could be convinced of the reality of evil. Evil was part of their world. I mean, they didn't face pogroms in Spain, but they knew about pogroms. They didn't face, but the creeping reality of Reconquista, no Jew in their right mind in 13th century Spain had any pretensions that once they were done with the Muslims, they were not going to come from the Jews. Evil was real. So we're not going to have this philosophical horse crap. We're not going to have this idea that evil's not real. Evil's real, and if evil's real, it must come from God, because everything comes from God. Everything flows from Ein Sof. So where does it come from? Well, we'll think back to this image, and we talked about this a minute ago. So Keter flows into Chokhmah. Chokhmah flows into Binah. And again, you can imagine sort of a rush of water, a rush of light. As it rushes out, it sort of gets caught by Chokhmah. And then as it rushes back over to Binah, it gets caught by Binah. And as it rushes over to Chesed, it gets caught by Chesed. But as Chesed rushes over to Gevurah can't catch it all. There's so much power flowing now that it hits into Gevurah, and it's like a bowl when you pour water into it, some of it runs out the side. Or it's like in the famed image in the Zohar, the image of Zohar loves better than any other one is the image of the blacksmith anvil. As you forge an item in a blacksmithery or in a smithery, you pound on that hot metal. And the only way you're going to get a fork or a knife or a spoon or a sword or whatever is you pound it. You have to pound that metal. There's no way you can shape the unformed metal without pounding on it. And as you pound on it, sparks fly off. Shards of metal fly off. Dross pours out. And it's an inevitable part of creating something. When you create something, it throws off sparks. And those sparks are burning and dangerous. And they're dross. They're wreckage. In the Zohar, that wreckage, that dross, those sparks, that excess of pure Gevurah, pure rage, righteous rage, you can imagine what ends up happening is that it flows out of Gevurah and it coats the entire backside of all of the other sefirot. Like a kind of evil coating, a darkness, a kind of hatred, a rage, an inversion, each one of these. As it coats the backside of them, that forms another reality. And the other reality is the world of the Sitra Achra, the other side. These are like inverted, evil, negative image sefirot. So horrifying, the first three don't even survive. They're so absolutely evil that the will of God destroys them, that they are annihilated. They can't even exist at all. They implode in their own absolute negativity, like a black hole or something. But the other 7, right? So the first 3 implode and vanish. 7, they continue to exist. Oh, I should say this about Binah, or about Dot. Sorry. In some schemes of this, you may see another sphera here, another sphera right here. So Dot, it means knowledge. The reason why there might be another sphera here is because Keter, because it's so not a thing, they don't count it as real, and you need something else to make the 10 up, and Dot becomes a kind of pseudo sphera. It gets really complicated. We can't get into it for the purpose of this class, but it ends up being a balance between the completely nothingness of Keter, of Chokhmah and Binah, and the balance of these 3, just like these are balanced here, these 4 are balanced in Tiferet, you get a balancer here and Dot. But often you'll see it drawn with sort of like a dot circle to be Dot. If you have questions about that, we can get to that later in the Q&A. At any rate, that dross is thrown off, and that becomes evil. For the Zohar, evil's real. It's a necessary aspect of reality, and you can't get rid of it by anything other than refining it. You can't get rid of it except for by refining it. You have to subject it to purification. And how does one purify it? One purifies it by the process of what we'll see as tikkun olam. Now, as we get to later on, what's important to know about this, I'm just going to go a little bit over, but I think we'll get a lot of this done. So the Zohar doesn't imagine evil as an inherently bad thing. It imagines it as an excess of something that has to be tempered. And you temper it by rectifying, by fixing it. And in the later Luriani Kabbalah, we'll get to this later on, this becomes the shards of the klipot, these demonic entities, demonic angels almost, that rule the world of darkness. And that world of darkness can creep into our world. And one of the lines in the book of Genesis that the Zohar really harps on in this is it talks about the 7 Edomite kings that died. And this is a throwaway line of Genesis 22 or something, that it seems like that these lines don't have anything to do with anything. There's a bunch of Edomite kings that died. No, not for the Zohar. They're the primordial evil worlds that exist. And you have to deal with them. You have to deal with them by rectifying. And the thing that the Zohar is the most worried about, the thing that it harps on the most, more than I think anything else, is the same kind of thing the Catholics harp on. And that's masturbation. My God, Zohar is horrified of sexual sins, especially masturbation. And there's the idea that if one wastes seed, then that seed, the spent semen that's sort of lying there, becomes demons. It becomes like more and more demons. And the world gets more and more imbalanced, and more tilted to the side of the other side. Also, the uncleanliness of so-called uncleanliness of menstruation. This is a deeply horrifying world. In fact, so much so that because of the primordial sin of Eve, she is the sort of representative of evil in the world, because her menstrual blood is like a dross thrown off by her menstrual cycle. And the menstrual blood is just like the dross thrown out in the process of creation, where creation sort of didn't occur, baby wasn't born. Again, it's super problematic in lots of ways. But the idea is that the blood flowing out of her mirrors the dross thrown off in the process of creation, whereby you get this sort of not createdness. And there's a ton of interest in evil. The Zohar abounds in discussions of evil, and it's probably leaning very heavily on discussions of evil to be found in the earlier Kabbalists of Castile. Remember the Cohen brothers? They were very interested in evil. They wrote the treatise of the emanation of Lebanon inside. And so there are tons and tons of things about evil, especially anti-Gentile stuff. So we have to be very honest. The Zohar hates Gentiles. Overwhelmingly thinks Gentiles are corrupt, evil, and dangerous, and bad. This is not an ecumenical text. Any stretch of the imagination, you cannot read this text and imagine this text has anything good to say about Gentile people, non-Jewish people. It is very negative on them. And so, again, are you that surprised? Again, imagine being Jewish in 13th century Spain. Do you have positive interactions with non-Jewish people, with Christians? Not really. So it's unsurprisingly they're going to have a pretty negative attitude when it comes to non-Jewish people. Now, does that mean that the Zohar is inherently bigoted? It might. it might mean that it's a bigoted text, especially if you take those same attitudes and apply them to non-Jewish people now. Yeah, it's going to result in you being real bigoted, mystically bigoted, probably the worst form of bigotry. So we have to own the fact that that stuff is in there and deal with it as Jews. If you want to study the Zohar and study the Kabbalah, you have to understand there are bigoted things against non-Jewish people there, and you have to deal with them in whatever way you think it's fit to deal with them. And they can lean on that because the historical character of Shimon Bar Yochai himself was heavily oppressed by the Romans and the Roman colonial project in Judea. And also Shimon Bar Yochai says some of the most shockingly anti-Jewish, anti-Gentile stuff you can find in the entire Talmud. I think he says once that the only thing that Gentiles and snakes share the same thing in common. They're both better without heads. That stuff is terrible. For those of us who non-Jewish people are a huge part of our life, unconscionable. It's there. It's in the Talmud. It's in the Zohar, and we have to deal with it. We shouldn't ignore it. It's there. Now, can anti-Semites pick up on that stuff and claim that the Talmud is racist and hates Gentile people, and they can do the same thing about the Zohar? They don't know the Zohar very well, so they won't do that. But it's there too. Just so you anti-Semites know, you can also attack us with the Zohar. They don't know that because they don't take the time to actually read this stuff. The demonology of the Zohar is very complex. You have numerous stories of demons in the Zohar, and that's not surprising because you have the exact same kind of demonological stories flourishing in Christianity at the time. This is the exact same time that you get a rapid rise in demonology in the Christian world as well. And so, again, unsurprisingly, Jewish and Christian demonologies are sort of developing at pace with one another at this time period, and eventually this will give rise to the concept of the Dybbuk, and we'll get to the Dybbuk in a little while when we get to concepts of possession and exorcism in Judaism that begin to emerge primarily in the late 16th century. So the Dybbuk, you heard of the idea of the Dybbuk, it's going to emerge primarily, at least originally at some point. So far. Last thing for the night. What's really important about the Zohar is that it's an incredibly conservative text, which is to say it wants to defend rabbinic tradition. It's very wed to rabbinic tradition. There's no interest in sort of bucking rabbinical tradition. Now it interprets saying the rabbinical tradition in very exotic and ways, but it's very
Miss Aquarius.
Because philosophers are the most dangerous people.
How was your day? So far, so good. I slept. And my hours are reversed, but my podcast was published, which is cool, and I'm just going through published. Yeah. And I've got another 4 more to go, so that's great. And then I'm going to try to be on some others. Last night, I have written this like 8,000 or 6 to 8,000, depending if you want to include the title and the abstract, a very long journal entry, and I uploaded it to basically a journal associated with Oxford University. And so I have to wait to see how that goes. That's a process, but that's kind of an interesting thing that I haven't done previously is instead of just being like a social media icon or whatever you want to consider me, I want to be an academic resource as well. So trying to get into that world. I'm trying, Miss Aquarius. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Just give me one moment and I will send you an invitation. Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, I may have to restart my device. Yeah, let me do that, and I'll be right back, okay?